Hello everybody, Thy Lord Root here, and welcome back to another KSP tutorial. So today we are going to go to the moon. It's actually night outside, so I think it's appropriate that we choose to go to the moon now. But before we do that, we need to have a little bit of discussion. We have been ignoring one of the most important things of our deal here. And that is essentially how much capacity that our rockets have. And so let's just create a very simple rocket for us. We'll have ourselves a parachute. And we will also have, on top of that, maybe a decoupler. And one of our standard rockets. Maybe I'll pull one out from the other series that we're currently working on. Let me just find me a decoupler. And let's also get ourselves a couple of these fuel tanks here. Such as this. And as I tend to recall, we put an LVT-45 down with the additional decoupler and a back fuel or solid fuel rocket, as we might have here. Now we already have some idea of thrust to weight ratio, and I have this tool called Kerbal Engineer Redo that will help us with this. So you can see we get a good 977 meters per second out of the first stage. Well, what does that mean? That means that whenever we are changing our velocity, we are changing it in such a way that if we were to go in the direction of travel, that we could get up to 977 meters per second. You have to remember, though, velocity is a vector quantity, meaning that in addition to a magnitude, it has a direction as well. And so you can sort of imagine that if you have your prograde vector, and then you have your heading vector, which is the vector that you're pointing in, that you would actually get a change in delta V that is the hypotenuse of those. And so in that case, you'll get substantially less. However, that's not really why I wanted to have this discussion. It's because we need to start thinking about how we would approach getting to the moon, and we just need to add some things up. So, for instance, we need to add up our basic stages here based on certain engines. When we design this, we need to figure out exactly how much mileage we can get, because oftentimes that can be the difference between us getting on and off of the moon. So let's assume right now that this guy is in lunar orbit. If that's the case, we need to put on some of our hardware, for instance like these landing legs. We especially want those landing legs because of the fact that we tend to, oh, there we go. We tend to have these issues where without the landing legs we would tip over and probably not be able to get up. So those are required for the most part. And it takes about 500 meters per second of delta V when you're in orbit of the moon. And additionally, it takes another 500 to get off. And then another 700 or another 200. So we're looking at 1200 meters per second of delta V, which this covers. You may be wondering if there's a way we can trim this down, because a light lander is a good thing to have. Well, if we do trim this down, we're about at our limit already. how can we get past that? Well, you can basically take these fuel tanks here and add extra fuel as necessary so that you're built up to the point where it makes sense. And now our mass, if we compare this to one of these larger tanks here, this guy, without the landing legs, has a delta V of about 2,000 and a mass of about 2 kilograms or so. Compare it to this guy here. This guy happens to have a mass a little bit slightly higher, so this tank here, if we don't need the delta V, this tank is probably a better deal for us. Now, where did I set that engine? Because you could see we have way less mass as a result. So that pretty much answers that question. This is a decent lander. But another question is going to be, can we take off from the moon? Well, we can reasonably infer that we could take off on Kerbin, so it might be interesting to think that we could take off from the moon, and in fact we can. We have a very high thrust to weight ratio on the moon, and so this is definitely a good thing to have. However, that's not the only approach we can take. I mean, we can say here is that we want to add another stage that'll be our transfer stage, because right now we've just thought about what it takes to get from lunar orbit to the surface of the moon and then out again. So depending on your velocity, and this is the big deal here, but depending on your velocity, you actually want a fair amount of transfer available. And that's because, at least once you get into orbit, you want something to the tune of between 850 and 900 for your transfer burn. And then you also happen to want, in addition to that, an additional 200 or 300 meters per second just to get into orbit, because you're coming in between 700 or 800 meters per second usually. That's on the most shallow curve, so you want to be able to make up for that. And that right there is going to be our basic staging for when we're in orbit. But how about when we get into orbit ourselves? I mean, that's a good question, because we can deal with this 0.98 thrust to weight ratio once we're in orbit, because the atmosphere or gravity isn't slowing us down. But we additionally need to have the ability to get up. So we can build ourselves a long, slender rocket, like we've been doing for the past couple of times, or we could go here to structural, take this adapter, and move from the 1.25 meter parts to the 2.5 meter parts. And so, if we just take something like this is probably going to be a little bit too much for us. But, let's take one of these engines. We could take this main cell, which has more than enough thrust. In fact, a lot more. And that gives us about 4 meters per second of delta V, which is good because that means that we will have close to the amount of delta V we need to get out of the atmosphere. That, with the proper trajectory, is about 4,500 meters per second. However, there are some issues with this tank. We might just want to get out of the atmosphere to begin with this tank. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add on another tank at the bottom, and that increases us a little bit more. Now let's talk about 2 reasons why we might want to do this. The first, of course, is that it increases our delta V. It did so by about 200 meters per second, which is nice, but ultimately not where we want to go. I mean, we're probably going to want to do some other kinds of staging here. However, if we don't have this tank on the bottom, what will happen is this orange tank will overheat. It explode because it has a lesser heat tolerance for some reason or another. I guess it's because it's a cryogenic tank. And so what we can do instead is we can go to our fuel here, and we can put 2 of these in its place, and that will have about the same effect. Now, you may have some questions as well, like, well, why are we using this main cell? I mean, it does have a really, really high thrust-to-weight ratio on it. And in fact, it's actually quite heavy. The main cell is about 6 tons or so. What we could do to increase the delta V is put on a lighter engine, something kind of like this. And that gives us more than enough. In fact, we could even go down here and reduce the amount of fuel in this just by a little bit. And there's a very important lesson to be learned here, which is that your delta V is a factor of 2 things, or 3 things rather. It's, first of all, a factor of how much weight you have to deal with. And weight is basically, if you remember, it's your mass times that 9.8, or more simplified, 10 meters per second squared, that gives you a force in tons. That is tons force. So there's that, of course. But there's 2 other things that we haven't looked at much. There is the engine ISP. And the deal with the engine ISP is this is the velocity of your exhaust that's coming out as you fire your engines. The greater your exhaust velocity, the greater the pressure inside the nozzle. So what will end up happening is that you'll get more fuel efficiency as a result. Now, KSP actually does something a little bit interesting here in that it actually slows down fuel consumption instead of increasing your force. And real life rockets actually do not slow down their pumps to adjust for the ISP, at least as far as I know. You can also see here too that as we move the pressure indicator, we also have this issue to where the ISP is increasing, and that tends to happen. You see, in a lot of cases, these nozzles are designed in such a way that the engine nozzles, that is, are designed in such a way that they will give the greatest thrust on the ground, but they won't have that great of ISP, and that's for your launch stages. But on top of that, of course, you also have the fact that when you get up into space, you don't need all of that thrust. And so in our case, we've now got this issue to where we want that thrust to be limited in terms of our specific impulse. And so you can see here, we have that on our transfer stage. Now, despite all of that, there is something to think about here. We actually do want to move this up just a little bit, which we got these decouplers backwards. There we go. Again, staging is fairly important. Let's see, this guy is... How are these guys not in the right place? Maybe the engines are in the wrong place here. Something tells me we're going to have a critical staging error. At least at some point in the future. All stages. Well, that's rather interesting. This occasionally happens to cause issues, it would seem. But, yeah, at any rate, you know, we have a ton of fuel here, and I'm confident that this will be enough for us to lift off. We just have to do really one more thing. I'm actually going to do two more things here. The first is that I'm going to go here and use a smaller decoupler, just so that it fits that fairing. And that leaves a bit of an issue. This top part will wobble just a little bit, so we want to do something about that. Well, we have space tape here. These struts, we can basically take these and attach these in they're radial parts, so we can attach them however we want to. But they will keep these guys in place. And then we will also want to do the basic things as well, like put our power and all that good stuff on there. So I'm going to do that now. Well, I have no idea what's happened here. There we go. We got two of these guys, and we have a battery. And you know what? Normally I would not do this, but let's put on flight computer as well, so that we can track ourselves, because that will be something that is pretty important to us, except for some reason I've got this weird UI glitch that is related to engineer, I think. Anyway, I believe this guy's massless. This guy has no physics significance. Really the only thing left to do is I want to put some RCS on here, just in case we need it. Because you never know. And I'm going to call that good enough for now. Let's give this a name. I'm going to call this Mooner Shot 1. And I'm going to show you how to get into orbit. Well, not only how to get into orbit, but how to get into the KSC. Or not the KSC, the moon, rather. Let's get engineer. Or you know what, let's get our surface and our orbital velocity going, at least so that you can see this. Let's turn on T for stability, and let's throttle up, and I'll show you how this might work. If we go up here to the vessel stats, as well as this other thing here, we have certain things here like our orbital information. I'm actually going to move this out to the side here. We have our orbital information, which will give us an idea of our actual orbit, and then we also have the surface information, which will give us our speed relative to the surface. And you can see we are oscillating just a little bit, which is a bit of a problem. So what we can do about that is we can go back to the vehicle assembly building, and we can put on these launch stability enhancers. The reason we're oscillating like that is because of the fact that what is happening there is that we're on this little engine nozzle and we're pivoting on it, and so it's behaving a little bit like a pendulum. But on top of that, the other thing that we need to think of now is really two things. First of all, we need to think of what our velocity, our horizontal velocity, is going to be like relative to this sort of thing, and then we also need to see our orbital information so we can fine-tune our apoapsis. So I'm not going to open up the map at any point here, and I'm just going to turn this guy on. Now again, we're going to do our 10K gravity turn, or not gravity turn, pitch program. That'll be very useful to us. If we wanted to right now, you could see that we can actually see our biome and the situation we're in. And that is very good. And in fact, it looks like in this newest version, all of our surface things are up here. So yeah, we'll continue here. You can see we've got things like terrain heights, so we don't have to go and look at the radar altimeter, although we might want to. We have, in addition to that, it looks like the biome we're in won't tell us the situation, but we should be able to guess that. And then on top of that, we have our time to apoapsis, which is going to be very important, as you'll see. When we begin this turn, the hope is it will be close to 25 or 30 seconds on our time to apoapsis. That doesn't always work out. But if I begin turning about here, this is basically going to be about managing my time to apoapsis. In addition as well to managing my inclination. And in this case, fine control can be very useful for us as we drag down our axis. We could probably stand the throttle down some. It looks like we have gone over our deal here. And in fact, I don't care how much fuel we lose at this point. We need to recover on some of this. So we'll just bring down our inclination. The moon is at 0 degrees. And so that is very important here. I think we're safe to throttle up to full now. And there goes that stage. Ooh. Oh, I can see what happened here. We may not be able to quite get into orbit like this. Because, I mean, we could do a flyby. I'm not going to do a flyby, though. I'm going to do a landing. And in particular, I'm interested in seeing what went wrong here. Okay, so this guy is up here. These guys are reversed again. Okay. Well, this will give us another chance to try this out. Staging errors do occur, unfortunately. And in particular, the way that we've done staging here. Let's just double check this to be sure. There we go. That's more like it. And the way we've done staging does make this a bit of a problem. So again, SAS, and we're off. I'm turning on fine control again so that we don't drift so much. It does help if you do let the rocket stabilize just a little bit. But you will inevitably rather get some drift. And the best place to correct that drift and inclination is when you aren't moving that fast. That's the easiest time. So we can go down here, for instance. I can push down just a little bit. Now I can get us down to that 0.9. And you can see we're just dandy now. And pretty much the idea is that as soon as we move forward here, as soon as we build up speed, anyhow, we'll not have many issues here. Now there's other things as well. If we just look at the surface reading here, you can see one of the useful things we have here is our G-force and also our atmospheric efficiency. We want to keep that probably as close to 100 as we can, because that generally means that we will, without that efficiency, we're fighting drag. So we want to be as efficient as possible in this case. Let's just get rid of that though, because actually I think the atmospheric efficiency is for jet breathing engines, or air breathing engines like jet engines. We are drifting very, very slightly, so I'm going to bring down um, our inclination here. And our apoapsis is pretty high. I mean, certainly we're at our orbital height that we want to be at now. I'm just going to bring this guy up to something. Ooh, yeah. We are very, very inclined here. That's going to have penalties for us. And you can see some of our delta V has gone into correcting this, and that's probably okay for now. Ideally, as you flatten this guy out, you will want to get as close to having a periapsis as possible. But as it stands for now, this is close enough. And believe it or not, and this surprised me a little bit, we're actually on our maneuver already. We will lose a little bit of our delta, or our velocity to friction, which is not entirely unexpected. And 136 is a bit much for a flight like this, so it may be a good idea, at least in my humble opinion, to maybe turn down the thrust to weight ratio some. But other than that, you know, we're poised for a pretty good orbit, and this is nothing out of our delta V budget here. And so I think the best course of action is to burn between 6 and 7. Because as you probably remember, the best thing for us to do at burns is to burn halfway on one side and halfway through the other. And so, let's do that now. It might even be good for us to... There we go. We don't even really need to do much else here. We are good, as far as I'm concerned. But let's talk about another issue here. Let's talk about how to get to the moon. Well, it's very useful, of course, if you set the target. And you have to think of it sort of this way. You want to start burning when you can see the moon over the horizon, which would be about here or so. That's about 90 degrees off of where we would normally put it. And so about here or so is a good place. And all we have to do is burn prograde in order to get out there. It's kind of like... I'm trying to think of the best example here. It's... I guess it's kind of like Space Invaders. You shoot where you're going to hit, not where the thing currently is at. And of course, getting in as close as possible is nice too. We don't want to get in so closely that we would crash like that. That happens if you don't have a periapsis, you'll crash. And we generally want to be above 10k here. 23k I think is probably the best we're going to do here. Or 9k. You know, that's actually not bad. And you can see that's a pretty good deal. This is a what's called a Hohmann transfer, to where we're basically extending an ellipse out to where we just incidentally meet up with the moon at the given time. And if you're careful, you can do things that cause us to use less delta V. The Hohmann transfer is more efficient than just burning straight towards the moon. If we did that, we would actually need a ton of delta V, for the very reason that we'd have to intersect the moon now. And in fact, let's see if while we're doing this we can see the moon come up as we're burning. Prograde is this way. Moonrise should be soon. If you burn pretty much as soon as you see the moon, that will get you there. We have 1 minute and 21 seconds. That moon should be peering over the corner any moment now. So I'm thinking 40 is a good place to burn. Let's just get out there real quick. And the moon should be, yeah, right on time. You see the moon peering up over there, over the horizon, moving over the horizon like that. That is pretty much what we want to happen. And so basically the idea is that we have these angles where we can predict where this would happen, and you would use this in order to make your burns. Now, as you can see, our transfer stage is doing well here. And in fact, we may end up with a little bit extra, in which case we'll use this to help us land. And you might be saying, don't we want to land with the lander? And the thing is that if you have the fuel, you might as well land or use that fuel up. In fact, the failed Russian moonshot did that. Let's just bring this up to see how close we are. We are about as close as I want to be right now. It'll tell us SAS is disengaged because of the fact that we killed our target. But there are things we can do. If we want to come in equatorially with the moon, then of course you might remember that we can burn at this descending node. Although I think our periapsis is good the way it is. Or is it? We almost got a 10k periapsis there, so I'm going to do that. Well, maybe not. I wonder why this is increasing. Our engine is off. Must be a stability issue here. Anyway, let's move on. Now, one thing we probably should have double checked, and which we can do here, is to make sure we're coming on the right side. We want to be coming in counterclockwise with respect to the moon, because that is the direction of the moon's rotation. And that'll make landing a lot easier. It really doesn't matter which direction we come from if we're just going to be in orbit. But you can see, well, it looks like we are coming in on the wrong direction. Imagine that. And in fact, if we go here to engineer, it'll probably say we're at 180 degrees inclination. We can fix that. We just have to do an inclination burn. Because, I mean, that's what happened. We can also go polar here if we want to. Although that will take a lot of delta V. We'll just have to take it as it comes, I guess. This is not the optimal orbit. Because we want to be as close, or we want to actually be rotating with the moon. That's the best thing for us to do here. Unfortunately, that is not. It sometimes rather, is not the easiest thing to do. So instead of trying to get this perfect, I'm going to leave this as it is. And we're going to rotate into position here. You can see we are coming in fairly quickly, and it's a 20-second burn. So what I'm going to do is burn at 10, and then we will move forward to the landing. So there we go. So it's worth pointing out, in fact, that there are two moons in the Kerbin system. The first moon is one which you are, well, we could probably burn a little bit more there. There we go. That's okay. That's good enough for me. The first moon is one in which we are, this moon that we're on right now. But there's another one called Minmus that takes a little bit more effort to get to, but in some ways is easier. We've got this little 2-second burn. I'm going to begin our landing. Typically you want to land in the light, and you almost never want to land directly. You usually want to arc over to the place that you're going to land at. So that burn is coming now. Oop, well, that may have been a little bit too much. However, there is a crater here. And I'm actually going to burn anti-normal here and see if we can't hit it. Of course, maybe burning normal would be better. We want to hit this down here. Of craters are usually good places to land because they're flat, and as you may find out here in a bit, that can be very important. You see, if we just come over here like that, the ability for us to land flat like this is important precisely because of the fact that, oh, there we go, there's the rim of that crater. Because the ground is uneven. It used to be in previous versions of KSP that really wasn't a problem. But because the ground is uneven in this case, we have the risk of toppling over. And that risk is very real. Uh-oh. We have a bit of a problem, which is that I've decoupled. So this landing may not work out as well as we want it to. Let's see if maybe we can abort this. Incidentally, if you do have a staging malfunction, you should do everything within your power to handle it something kind of like this. By basically getting into orbit as quickly as you can. However, in our case, there may be nothing that we can do about this. You see, we're... Oh, wow, yeah. That is fortunate for us. Okay, let's see if we can fling this thing off. That is quite an interesting abort. So I didn't plan on teaching you that, but I'm gonna leave it in because I think it's actually important. Now, do we have an escape here? We do have a very, very high apoapsis, which is probably to be expected. Let's just focus in on this guy here. And another thing too, don't get too crazy with the time warp. As you just saw, Jub has spent an extra 14 days or so because of my itchy trigger finger on the time warp button. It always causes problems. That guy, by the way, there is the other moon, which I believe I will set as our target now. Once, once we get close enough in. Let's just worry on recovering old Job. You can see how fast we're coming in. This is one of the risks of returning from the moon, and you can see it's potentially disastrous if you have deadly re-entry on. This would have most certainly killed Jub, if not from the overheating from the probably from the parachute snapping off. But yeah, we'll do our thing here. We're getting pretty close to landing here. And we'll just let old Jeb descend down. I will see you in orbit with another launch vehicle in the interim, and we will make this Minmus landing, I'm sure. Okay, we are back, and we are now coasting to apoapsis here. And we're going to try to circularize this thing, at least as best as we can. You can see we're in a pretty good spot here because we are mostly around the planet. We got a little bit of leeway here. It's always best to wait for our orbit to decay a little bit as we are coasting. But yeah, once we get up to, oh, I don't know, 63 or so, once we are up into space, that's not going to be a huge issue. So we're at about 78. And this time, we want to select Minmus. Now, as it turns out, Minmus is actually kind of hard to see. On this map, at least. There's really two things you can do. If you've got Flight Engineer installed, then you can do that. You can basically go up to this guy here to the rendezvous deal. And though this may seem like cheating at first, I guarantee you it's not. Because what turns out happening here is that we end up not really having to fiddle around with the zoom any. So if we go to celestial bodies, we can hit Minmus, and it'll target that guy for us. Turns out Minmus was somewhere over here. I guess that's it. And of course, we will want to do our circularization. Now, there is a bit of a problem with Minmus, because one thing you may have noticed is that it's got an inclination. In fact, its inclination relative to us is about 6 degrees. We're at our ascending node, so we can do something to reduce that. Just a little bit, and that will, because there we go, because this is a vector, you know, we will lose some delta V here. There's a much more intelligent way of going about this, which is something along the following. If we assume that we have this guy right here, we you know, if we basically plot out towards Minmus and then do a correction there on our way out, then that will be even better. And so I'll show you what I mean here in a bit. You see, basically the idea is we're going to want to have to, there we go, we are a little bit high here. Not too high to deal with, but there we go. That is much better. Yeah, we are pretty high up, and we can't really see Minmus over the horizon that easily, so what we can do is we can at least, that is carbon escape. we have burned a little bit too much. You can see there we've got this guy here, and we could possibly do an off-plane maneuver to get there. In fact, we are pretty close, but we are also very high up, so what we would do here then is when we're far out, we would increase our descending node, and this would put us within 0.3 degrees of this, and this would allow us to more easily calculate our deal here. Now, of course, we can do other things as well, like, you know, we can manipulate our orbits so that we get as low as possible. Unfortunately, the angle that Minmus is at can be problematic. We are also coming in at a polar orbit and on the wrong side, so that is a bit of an issue as well. So there's, you know, a question of when the appropriate time to do this burn is. The best time is probably at your descending node. I mean, let's be fair, if it's going to, you know, this gives us 2 hours, which is okay. It also gives us an escape trajectory, which may not be so okay. So, the thing to do in this situation, if you cannot reasonably... Well, there's really two things you can do here. The first is that you can match inclination ahead of time. That, as we found, is not such a good idea, for us at least. But if we want to be coming in, we're doing this soft plane change here, and that's helping us a little bit. And again, the lower we come in, the better. It may not be so bad if we can come in pretty low. As it turns out, Minmus also has a low enough gravity or gravitational potential on a rocket that it actually makes some amount of sense for us to even come in from this other angle. So I'm going to do that. And let's just get ready for that burn. It comes in 25 minutes. You want to say hi? But yeah, anyhow, we're getting pretty close here. And that landing won't be too hard for us to take care of. That's 928 meters per second, which is eerily close to our escape velocity. We have 1 minute and 31 seconds, so burning at 45 is just about perfect for us, except when you time warp through it, that will cause problems, to say the least. Not problems that we can't overcome, but it will cause us problems. Let's just get rid of this guy here so we can see where we're going. Now, for some reason or another, we have a periapsis that is not quite where we want it to be. It's because we burn so late. Being able to point at the maneuver node will probably help, of course. But ultimately, we want to get it maybe 4600, 4640 or so. And try to get it. Ooh, was that? That definitely was not it. There is. Well, that's rather rare. We actually have another shot at this moon encounter. That happens from time to time. It really depends on the absolute position here of the moon relative to Minmus. Another thing you'll notice too is that we happen to have what's called a free return trajectory going on, and the free return trajectory is this deal to where what we're essentially doing is we're firing in such a way that our orbit, thanks to the slingshot effect, will get us pretty closer, in this case, inside of Kerbin. And so the Apollo astronauts actually used this on their first couple missions. Just made it possible in the event of some crazy malfunction to get back. Just make that inclination burn. You know, I'm going to make it now, or almost now. The further out you get, you'll find the less sensitive these things are to error. So in our case, we are more or less where we want to be. And we can move on to Minmus. Now, I have mentioned that we are on the wrong side, and this is actually fairly easy to take care of, but it does cost some delta V. I mean, the fortunate thing is that we have plenty of delta V here. What you end up doing when you want to turn around like this is you can burn radial. That'll get us on the other side of the planet if we can get it to go. So yeah, that is our positive radial direction, and I'm just going to make that burn happen. Or it's negative radial. It also has the effect of bringing our orbit in. So this is about where we want to be here, and 79 is an okay periapsis. It's probably much better to get it down to 20, depending on where we want to land. And you can see we still got plenty of fuel. And what is our inclination like? We're at 9 degrees. It's just a matter of finding out which one of these. I believe if we point this way, we'll be fine. We'll just want to reduce this down as much as possible. I mean, the main thing here is to take this periapsis and bring it down as close as possible. And this is one of those circumstances where having a mouse, if you don't have one plugged in, is very handy, because Minmus is very, very small, so you want to plug in your mouse like I'm doing now. And it must seem strange that I don't have a mouse. And by the way, you can focus on these planetoids by clicking on them. I forgot to mention that. But you can plug in, or you can focus on your planetoids or on other vessels by double clicking on them. So, that pretty much leads us to where we're at now, at this 6-degree inclination. And I find it necessary to point out that you will run into one or two problems when landing on Minmus. Certainly it's easier to land on because the delta V requirement is much less. In fact, it takes much less to even get into orbit. But on the other hand, the Minmus is very, very hilly, so that is a bit of a problem. It's one that is not terribly hard to rectify. There we go. That is more like it. But these little flat areas here, I'll zoom in on one of them. Like this guy here. That guy is the easiest to land on because A, that is at sea level, and B, that's completely flat. So that's going to be where we're going to shoot. The other thing to mention, of course, that I did not mention during the moon landing bit, is that you do want to be careful. As you can see, we actually have quite a bit of adjustment to do because the planet is rotating. That's important to take into account when you're landing. because of the fact that we're rotating, we have to plot ahead when we land. So that's a 5-second burn there. I'm going to burn somewhere between 3 and 2. Or, I'm going to give it half throttle. At least until we get to where we want to. That seems like a good deal there. And we still have plenty of fuel here. In fact, so much fuel that we don't need this guy here. But we're going to use it anyway. So, I think now is probably a good time to burn. You can see we're already beginning to descend just a little bit. And we can use this to perform what's called a suicide burn. A suicide burn is basically what it sounds like. I'm going to hit G here for gear. There we go. We have no real use for this fuel anymore. I'm going to just knock it out of the way. But a suicide burn is basically burning as quickly or as close to the surface as you can. And waiting to do it. So if we go to surface here, we have the, somewhere around here at least, maybe it's vessel, suicide burn distance. We cannot burn any more quickly here than, or this distance is where we should burn. It's going down very slowly. We should burn when we get to 0, and that's at full throttle. So let's try that. It'll take some 57.2 meters per second of delta V. And it's calculated that largely from the deal here. I'm actually getting a little bit worried about this, to tell you the truth. And there goes our second stage. I'm going to start my suicide burn a little bit early, because we are coming down quite quickly. And ideally, you want to get this down as low as possible when you're descending, because the harder you land, the more rotational force you will suffer. So there's a fine balance between these two. That balance of being whether or not you want to let this thing, hang out as much as you can. And certainly when you get close, like you can see your shadow, for instance, that's usually a good sign that you want to start burning pretty soon, which is what we're going to do now. But not so much that you actually gain vertical velocity. With a very light tap of the throttle, though, you can moderate your thrust in such a way that you can manage it. So you can see we're actually coming down almost at a snail's pace. With this configuration, you could probably hit the you'd probably hit the ground at a much higher velocity, like maybe 10 meters per second. But you don't want this thing to bounce back too much. And just like you can do otherwise, you know, you can go out, you can usually take an EVA, and then if you want, you can come out here and plant a flag, maybe something. And you can do an EVA report too. That is for science, of course, which will become more important in the future. But we'll just say now, Jeb landed here, and this is the Great Flats. Great Flats. Yeah, so all we have to do on Minmus is if we hit R, we of course get our jetpack capability, and we can hit space to jump, but it's easier to use our jetpack. And then hit F, go back in. Get ourselves into orbit. And that's fairly easy. We just want to burn towards 90 here. And we want to turn over almost immediately. And then we'll plot the escape. Now, a good orbit is probably somewhere around 20K for this. I'm going to go ahead and point down just a little bit to raise my axis so that we really, 30K is even better here, but I mean, it'll take a while regardless. It'll take us 24 minutes, and if you think that's slow, which, truth be told, it sort of is, that's not as slow as it gets. I've actually seen this sort of thing get much slower. One thing we do have to worry about, of course, is crashing into the mountains here. We do want to be careful of that. I'm going to turn on physical time acceleration, and I'm going to turn off pointing towards this guy so that it doesn't shake the craft to death. But we will be able to move faster and faster until we get to this area here. And that's a mere 16 meters per second to get into orbit. And how close are we? We are about a minute away. That's 1 second of burn there. And let's just get this guy up into orbit. We do have to be kind of careful here. That's always kind of finicky. But now we're done. All we really have to do is pick a spot. My guess is probably somewhere around here. the periapsis is a little low. We want our periapsis to be as close to Earth as possible. We'll come in at quite an inclination. That right there is very steep. 23 will definitely slow us down though, so if we get ready for that, that node is in 6 minutes. That's a 16-second burn, so I'm going to burn at 8 seconds. And we are almost there. So that's really all it takes. Certainly, we could do other things with this. Right now, we just want to leave. And get in as close as possible. One thing we could do if we are concerned about our periapsis here, and this is sort of a last-ditch effort, is we could raise that just very slightly by, if I could find our retrograde vector. If we stage towards retrograde, this guy will get kicked down a little bit further, and this guy here actually want to be pointing prograde. So this will actually give us a steeper angle. However, we do have RCS on this vessel. So one thing we can do is that we can raise this until we hit our desired periapsis. And we will be hitting this soon. With no precision, of course, and it looks like we're landing on the dark side of Kerbin. But I mean, that's okay. Certainly now there's nothing that can get in our way here of landing, except maybe a parachute failure, which, might actually happen. We are also rotating out of control a little bit. I'm going to look at our terrain height and make a determination on where it is we want to land. And another thing too is if we turn off, well, where are we? We're on the other side of the planet, it looks like. If there are other countries in Kerbin, then that might be a bit of an issue. Right now, we're at least on land, and that is usually a good sign. Let me look at this guy here. We're about 200 meters above the deal, so we've got our deployment of the parachute there. Coming in for a bit of a rough landing. But that is more or less how you get back from one of these bodies. And that is, of course, how you kill Jeb. I probably should not have time warped through that. That was rather unfortunate. But anyhow, this has been thy Lord Root, and I shall see you later.